The wind came in low over the canyon, curling through the sagebrush like it carried secrets in its breath. It was late March, and the thaw had begun to eat the snow off the high ridges, though patches of white still clung stubbornly to the northern faces of the hills. In that wide and silent stretch between Willow Creek and the next town east, not much moved except hawks and horses and the occasional prayer sent up by someone too tired to speak it aloud. Mara Langley kept to herself now. 4 winters had passed since the morning her husband rode out and didn't come back, and though the calendar kept turning, something inside her stayed there in that stillness, that waiting. Folks in town had stopped asking after Tom. They said things like, "God knows best, and you done all you could," their voices soft with pity, never daring to speak the more likely truth. The man was dead, lost to a blizzard or bad men or worse, but Mara hadn't buried him. And that absence, that unfinished ache, held her in a place just shy of mourning. She made her life in the old parsonage at the edge of town, near the cottonwoods, where the river sang louder than the silence inside her. It was a modest place with a cracked stove and 3 rooms, 2 of which she never used. Her trade was midwifery, passed down from her mother, and her hands knew how to coax life from the edge of pain. She delivered babies for the ranch wives and the miners' girls, cleaned them, named them when their mothers could not bear to. She kept no ledger, only memories. Some nights she woke hearing their cries in her dreams, phantom wails of children she'd brought into the world and left behind. The morning it started, the sky was the color of tarnished silver and the air held a damp edge. Mara was returning from the Pike farm, where she delivered a breech baby to a 17-year-old girl with frightened eyes and no husband in sight. The trail back was slick with meltwater, her mare skittish in the mud. About 2 miles from home, at the base of a bluff overgrown with chokecherry and ash, she saw the tracks, wagon wheels and boots, cutting deep into the soft earth. Strange to see them there, off the main road. Stranger still to see the smears of blood in the slush. Mara dismounted, heart thudding. She followed the tracks up the rise and into a small clearing where a wagon sat lopsided, one wheel sunken in the thaw. A woman lay beside it, half covered by a patchwork quilt, her face pale and slick with sweat. The bulge of her belly was unmistakable. Her eyes fluttered open at Mara's approach, and for a moment something like wild relief passed between them. "Please," the woman rasped, voice cracked from thirst. "Help me, it's coming fast." Mara knelt without hesitation, fingers already reaching for the pulse at her neck, the shape of the child inside. The woman's breath was shallow but steady. She was young, no more than 20, and alone. The nearest help was hours away, but Mara had her satchel, her tools, and enough grit left in her bones to see this through. "It's all right," Mara murmured, brushing sweat-damp hair from the girl's brow. "You're safe now. My name's Mara. We'll get through this together." The birth was hard. The girl screamed and screamed again, clinging to Mara like a lifeline. Blood soaked into the cold ground. A crow called out overhead, loud and ragged. But then finally the child came, red and furious and alive. A boy. Mara wrapped him in the girl's quilt and pressed him to her chest, her hands trembling not from fear, but something deeper, older, harder to name. The mother wept quietly, exhaustion pulling at her features. "Thank you," she whispered. "God, thank you." Mara nodded, her own breath catching. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lena," she said. "Lena Ray." "You got anyone waiting for you, Lena?" The girl nodded faintly, eyes fluttering closed. "My husband, he went for help. He said he'd come back. Tom, his name's Tom." Mara's heart stopped clean in her chest. The child whimpered. The trees held their breath. She rose slowly, staring down at the woman and the bundle in her arms, the name echoing in her ears like a shot across a canyon. "Tom." She whispered it to herself, not daring to believe. But there it was. The man Lena called husband was the one Mara had been waiting for. And he had come back, but not for her. The wind changed. Mara stood at the edge of the clearing, boots sinking into the thawed earth, heart thundering louder than the creek below. She watched Lena drift into exhausted sleep, the infant quiet in her arms, and the world bent itself around the weight of that name. Tom, her Tom. She didn't believe in coincidences. Not out here, not where the land was too unforgiving to make space for miracles without a price. There were no letters, no sightings, no bones to mourn, only silence. And now a young woman with a newborn and a story that fit like a knife into Mara's ribs. She built a fire while the sky darkened, her hands working on muscle memory. The clouds hung low, pregnant with more weather, and somewhere far off thunder grumbled. She boiled water, cleaned her tools, fed Lena sips of tea between her sleep-heavy murmurs. The girl didn't stir much, only curled tighter around her child, the way wolves do when the world turns cold. It was near midnight when the first rustle came from the trail. A horse, light on its hooves, carrying a rider who moved like he knew how to disappear. Mara reached for the rifle she kept tied beneath the wagon's seat, cradled it in her lap like she'd done 100 times before, but her blood was ice. The man emerged slow from the pines, lantern swinging low at his side. He dismounted with care, tying the reins to a nearby branch. The light caught his face as he stepped closer, and the breath in Mara's lungs turned to ash. It was him. Older, yes, weather-worn, a beard roughing his jaw, lines etched deeper at the corners of his eyes. But it was Tom, her husband, the man she'd buried 1,000 nights in her mind, alive. And looking right past her. "Lena," he called softly, setting down the lantern, kneeling beside the girl. His voice was raw with fear. "Are you all right?" She stirred faintly. "The baby came," she whispered. "A woman found me, she helped." He turned then, following the trail of her words, until his eyes landed on Mara. His face changed, shock, disbelief, something almost like shame. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The air between them thickened with what couldn't be unsaid. "Mara," he breathed. "She didn't move. You're alive." He looked away, back toward Lena, then to the fire, as if grounding himself in the now. "I never meant for it to be this way." Rage rose sharp in her throat, but she swallowed it. Not here, not with a baby asleep and a girl bleeding slow into the soil. "You got her in trouble?" she asked, voice like flint. He flinched. "We're married." "That don't answer the question." His jaw tightened. "We met 2 years ago. I was living out past Delano. No one knew me there. I thought, hell, Mara, I thought you moved on." She laughed, bitter and short. "I waited 4 years, Tom, lit a lamp every night, buried you without a grave." Silence fell again. The child whimpered and Lena stirred. "Don't wake her," Mara said quietly. "She lost a lot of blood. She needs rest. That boy needs food." Tom nodded, unsure of what to do with his hands. He looked smaller now, like the shame was stripping the meat from his bones. "I never stopped loving you," he said. Mara turned from him. "That ain't love, Tom. Love don't vanish. It don't start over with someone new while the old life still waits in the dark." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the moment passed. The fire cracked low between them. She spent the rest of the night tending Lena, keeping distance between herself and the man who'd once been her whole world. At dawn, the storm broke, a soft rain falling through the pines, mist curling up from the earth. Mara wrapped the child tighter, fed Lena warm broth, and told herself she'd figure the rest out later. But even as she whispered comfort to the girl, even as she watched the man, who was no longer hers, cradle the boy like he understood what he'd been given, Mara knew the reckoning had only just begun. Tom had come back, but not for her. And somewhere deep inside, something began to shift, not break, but bend. A slow, painful yielding to the truth that nothing lost ever comes back the same. By mid-morning, the rain turned steady. The sky hung heavy over the hills, and the fire hissed low in protest. Mara packed up the wagon with practiced efficiency, checking Lena's pulse, rewrapping the cloth between her legs. The bleeding had slowed, but the girl's skin still held that waxy sheen that spoke of too much taken too fast. "We need to get her inside," Mara said, not looking at Tom. "Back to my place. She won't last another night out here." He nodded without arguing, his eyes hollow. He lifted Lena with more care than Mara expected, tucking the baby against her chest, wrapping the quilt around them both. The movement was awkward, not yet a father's ease, but not without tenderness either. It was a strange thing, watching him carry another woman like that. Stranger still that Mara didn't feel the old fury rise. Not yet. The trail back was rough in the rain, the wagon wheels biting deep into the muck. Mara rode ahead, her mare sure-footed in the slop, scouting the path for fallen limbs or washouts. Behind her, she heard the soft murmur of Tom speaking to Lena, voice low, gentle. She tried not to listen. When they reached the parsonage, Mara opened her home to them like she would any patient. She set Lena up in the front room, closest to the fire, where the cot had been made ready with clean linens. The girl barely stirred. The baby fussed now and then, and Mara fed him goat's milk from a cloth-wrapped spoon, praying he'd take to it until Lena could nurse again. For 2 days they lived in a kind of limbo. Tom chopped wood, carried water, tried to help without stepping on the fragile threads of trust that still held him in place. He didn't press Mara, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't explain himself unless she asked, and she didn't, not yet. On the third night, Lena sat up for the first time, her face drawn but alert. "He was always talking about her," she said suddenly, while Mara changed her bandages. "Even before I knew her name, he carried a ribbon in his coat pocket, blue like cornflowers." Mara froze. "I asked once and he just said my first life. I thought maybe it was a sister or a friend from before the war. He never said wife." Mara sat back on her heels, hands slick with carbolic. He was always good at keeping things close. Lena didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. "He's not a bad man, you know, just broken in ways I couldn't see when I met him." That, Mara thought, was the cruelest truth of all. She looked at Lena, this girl who should have been a rival, and saw only the echo of herself, so young once, sitting in that same room, waiting for a man to come back from the hills, trusting too much, loving too hard. "I don't hate you," Mara said, surprising herself. Lena's eyes brimmed. "I didn't know there was someone to hate." They sat in quiet then, the baby cooing soft from the basket by the fire. Outside, the rain kept its rhythm, steady as breath. Later that night, Tom found Mara on the porch. She was mending a tear in her coat, needle flashing in the lamplight. He stood there a long while before speaking. "Why didn't you ask where I'd been?" Mara didn't look up, "Because it wouldn't change what you did after. I nearly died out there, got caught in a flood south of Coal Bend, broke my leg, lost the horse. Crawled 3 days before someone found me. By the time I could walk again, it had been months. I figured you'd moved on. I couldn't face coming back to nothing." Mara set her sewing down. "So you built a new life." "I tried, but the old one didn't let go." She finally looked at him. "You had choices, Tom, and you made them." "I know," he stepped closer, "but I never stopped missing you." Her voice was quiet, tired. Missing ain't the same as staying. He didn't argue. He just stood there, soaking in the guilt, letting it settle into his bones like the damp. Mara picked up her coat again. "You should sleep. She'll need you tomorrow." He lingered a beat too long, then turned and went inside. She sat there long after the lantern burned low, the needle paused mid-stitch. She didn't cry. There were no tears left for him, not the kind she used to give. What lived in her now was different, heavier, rooted. And still, when the baby cried near dawn and Mara rose from her cot to feed him, she cradled him with a kind of reverence. He was not hers, but he had come from love, or something close to it. And that, she thought, had to mean something. Spring crept in by inches. The snow withdrew from the gullies, leaving behind a blackened crust and the first stubborn shoots of green. Ice broke apart on the river, flowing fast and loud, carrying branches and secrets down toward places Mara would never see. Inside the parsonage, life settled into a rhythm as delicate as spun glass. Lena gained strength with each passing day, her cheeks growing less hollow, her hands steady again. The baby, named Samuel, though Mara only heard Lena call him Sam, was a quiet child, alert and watchful, as if he sensed the tension that lay like a coiled rope between the adults around him. Tom made himself useful. He patched the sagging roof, mended the chicken wire, brought in firewood without needing to be asked. But he never pushed. He stayed in the barn most nights, bedding down in the loft beside the wagon where he could listen for the baby's cries. Mara let him, not because she trusted him, but because the house felt too small for all the things still unspoken. It was on a quiet evening, with Lena asleep and the baby napping in a basket by the stove, that Mara found herself alone in the garden, pulling up winter weeds. The soil was damp beneath her nails, smelling of rot and renewal, and her back ached the way it always did after a hard season. Tom's shadow fell beside hers. "Need a hand?" he asked. She shook her head, not unkindly. "This part's mine." He crouched anyway, close but not touching. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind whispering through bare lilac branches. "I've thought about writing to your folks," he said finally. Mara kept her eyes on the dirt. "They think you're dead. I let them think it. I know I was going to, when I got back. Then I saw Lena was sick, pregnant, there wasn't time. Mara sat back on her heels, brushing soil from her hands. There's always time for the truth, Tom, you just didn't want to face it. He looked at her then, not with the pleading regret she'd seen in his eyes before, but something steadier. Acceptance, maybe. You're right, he said. That quiet admission broke something in her, not the anger, not the sorrow, but the weight of holding it all alone. She hadn't realized how long she'd been keeping herself upright through sheer will. I needed you, she said softly. When Ma died, when the drought came, when I thought maybe it'd be better to lie down beside the grief and never get back up. Tom's face tightened. I was gone. Yes, she said, but not dead. The difference was everything. One you mourned, the other you waited for, until waiting became a kind of rot. The sun dipped low, setting the hills ablaze. From inside, Samuel stirred, his cry rising sharp and sudden. Mara stood. She'll need help feeding him. Tom didn't follow. He stayed in the garden long after the light faded, alone with the raw truth of his leaving. Later that night, when the baby was fed and sleeping, Lena spoke quietly from her cot. I won't stay forever, she said. I know this place belongs to you. Mara sat at the wash basin, combing her hair. You don't have to go. I think I do. Tom still looks at you like a man drowning. Mara's hand paused in her hair. And you. Lena smiled, a tired thing. I love him, but love and belonging aren't the same. The words sat between them like folded linen, plain and clean. The next morning, Lena asked Mara to teach her how to bind wounds, how to make poultices and soothe fevers. She said she wanted to help other women one day, the way Mara helped her. They began small, herb names, stitch patterns, how to listen to a woman's breath when her voice gave out. It was a strange kind of bond, but it grew steady and warm. And still Tom hovered, not out of guilt but responsibility, maybe hope. Mara didn't know yet if that hope was hers to hold. But each time she handed Samuel back to Lena, each time she brushed the girl's hair or wrapped her in warm quilts or pressed a sleeping bundle into the arms of the man who had once belonged to her, Mara felt something shifting. The past was a wound, but even wounds could scar over. And in the right light, scars could shine. The hills blushed green by the middle of April. Crocuses pushed up through the thawed soil, and the cottonwoods along the river began to hum with bees. Morning came with birdsong again, the kind that made even the tiredest soul sit up and listen. In the parsonage, life no longer hung on the edge of emergency. Lena moved easily now, her cheeks full of color, the soft swing of her braid returning each time she walked the room with Samuel tucked against her chest. She'd taken to humming as she worked, small tuneless things that filled the quiet like sunlight through lace curtains. Mara watched from a distance, heart tender with something she didn't yet have a name for. Pride, maybe. Or the aching joy of survival shared between women who'd bled in the same room and come through it. Tom, meanwhile, built a cradle from cedar, every joint sanded smooth, each curve careful. He spent his days fixing what he could around the property, fence posts, floorboards, the smokehouse roof, and his nights silent beneath the stars, sometimes with Samuel in his arms. The boy fussed less with him than Mara expected, as if some part of blood remembered itself, even when the mind faltered. It was on a morning thick with fog that Mara rode out alone, the saddle creaking beneath her as she turned west toward the old chapel ruins. She hadn't gone there since the storm 2 winters back collapsed the steeple, but something pulled her now. A memory, maybe, or a ghost. She dismounted slow, leading her mare by the reins. The chapel sat quiet, half swallowed by moss and time. Inside, dust and broken pews, the altar collapsed beneath its own grief. Mara stood there a long time, listening to nothing but wind. She remembered their wedding, how Tom's hands had trembled as he slid the ring onto hers, how he'd whispered something no one else heard. I'll never leave you. Promises made with such certainty didn't account for the world's hunger. It took and it took, until a man forgot what he was holding, or believed it could be replaced. She knelt where the floor still held, fingers brushing the earth. I forgive you, she whispered, not to him, not entirely, but to herself, for needing so long, for loving so hard, for surviving. When she returned, Lena was outside, hanging linens on the line. The baby slept in a sling across her front, head lolling against her shoulder. She smiled when she saw Mara, but it didn't reach the corners of her eyes. "I want to head east," she said, as if she'd been holding the words all morning. "Not far, just to Stillwater. There's a woman there who takes on girls like me, helps them learn nursing." Mara's throat tightened. "You don't have to go." "I know," Lena said, "but I think I'm meant to." They stood a while in the soft wind, the smell of wet earth all around them. Mara reached out, brushing a hand along Samuel's cheek. "You'll be good at it," she said. "I learned from the best." That night Mara told Tom by the fire. He didn't ask why Lena had made the choice. He didn't try to change her mind. "She deserves her own story," he said. "We all do." Mara studied him then. The beard was shorter now, his eyes clearer. Less like a ghost, more like a man still walking through the wreckage he made. "She said she loves you," Mara said. He looked into the fire. "I know. And I care for her, but she saved me at a time I didn't think I could be saved. That ain't love, not the kind I had with you." She didn't speak. She just watched the flames shift. "I'm not asking for you back," he said. "Not unless you want me. I'd stay either way, raise the boy if she asks me to, help build what needs building." Mara's voice came quiet. "What if I don't know yet?" "Then I'll wait." He meant it. She could hear it in the steadiness of his breath. She didn't answer that night, but when the fire burned low, she didn't ask him to go back to the barn either. And in the hush that followed, the world outside turned softer. The next day, Lena packed what little she had. Tom drove her as far as the fork in the road, where the land split, Stillwater east, everything else west. Mara watched them go from the porch, Samuel's blanket folded in her arms. She'd see him again, that much she knew. What came after, though, was still unwritten. And maybe that was all right. The summer came in slow, like it too was unsure how to begin again. Mara rose with the sun most mornings, her hands finding work before her mind caught up. She tended the garden until the beans began to climb, taught herself to patch saddle leather, and once a week rode into town with herbs and salves wrapped in wax paper. Folks still came to her with their pain and their hoping, and she met both with the same quiet steadiness she always had. Tom stayed. He built a smokehouse by the creek and fixed the well pulley that had groaned for years. He didn't press, didn't prod. He was just there, in the creak of the porch swing, in the smell of cedar shavings, in the low hum of a man who'd learned not to speak too soon. Samuel came back in late July. Not alone, Lena brought him, of course, riding in a borrowed cart with a hand-woven bag full of letters and dried sage. Her eyes were sunbright, her hands surer. She looked less like a girl and more like a woman who had learned the strength of her own feet. "He missed you," she said, setting the baby, no, the boy now, into Mara's arms. Mara didn't speak, only pressed her face into his curls and held him as he squealed with delight. Tom stood nearby, silent but aching. There was no jealousy, no tension, only a recognition of something enduring. Lena stayed for 3 nights, long enough to share what she'd learned. How to lance a boil without drawing too much blood. How to fold linen just so for binding cracked ribs. How the old woman in Stillwater told her healing was a kind of scripture, and every hand that gave comfort wrote a verse. "You were my first teacher," she said to Mara one night as they watched fireflies blink in the dark. "Whatever else I become, part of it started here." When she left again, Mara gave her the small silver comb that had belonged to her mother. "For when the road gets hard," she said, "or when you forget who you are." Lena hugged her like a sister. After that, things settled, not into sameness, but into something gentler. Tom worked the fields in the mornings and read by lantern at night. He didn't sleep in the barn anymore. He took his place at the table, always quiet, always waiting. Mara didn't forgive all at once. Her heart wasn't made for easy surrender. But she watched him carry Samuel on his shoulders, heard the boy laugh, and saw in Tom something changed. Not a man returned, but a man remade. She let him touch her hand one evening under the stars while crickets hummed around them. She didn't pull away. He didn't speak. Love had become something quieter now, not a flame but a hearth, not a promise but a presence. In the fall, a woman from a ranch 20 miles north arrived in the middle of the night, her labor sharp and early. Mara worked through until dawn, Samuel sleeping in a cradle beside the fire, Tom holding the lantern steady. When the child came, blue-eyed and squalling, the mother wept with relief. "You're an angel," she whispered. Mara only smiled and wrapped the child in linen. "No, ma'am, just someone who stayed." That winter, snow came early. The wind howled across the valley, but the walls held firm and the fire never went out. Sometimes Mara sat by the window and watched the white drift down. Samuel played by her feet with wooden animals Tom carved. The world outside was quiet, hard, yes, but not unkind. She'd lost a husband once. She hadn't gone looking for him. But when he came back, carrying a different life, a new kind of love and the shadow of his own brokenness, she hadn't turned him away. What she'd built was not the life she expected. But it was hers, made of second chances, of blood and mercy, of hard-won peace, and the soft hum of a boy's laughter in the heart of winter. And that, Mara knew, was enough.